The year was 1219, and Princess Tumulun stood on the highest tower of Otrar, watching the horizon darken not with storm clouds, but with dust, an ocean of dust, rising from the hooves of 200,000 horses. The Mongol horde had arrived. She was 17 years old, daughter of Analchuk, the governor who had made the fatal mistake of executing Genghis Khan's trade envoys. Now, as the distant thunder of hoofbeats grew closer, she understood with crystalline clarity that her life as she knew it was about to end. But what she couldn't know, what no one in that doomed city could know, was that her fate would be shared by hundreds of thousands of daughters across an empire that stretched from Korea to Hungary. If you've ever wondered what really happened to the women left behind after conquest, stay with this story. What you're about to hear will change how you see one of history's most powerful empires. To understand what happened to these daughters, we must first understand the world they inhabited. In the early 13th century, Central Asia was a tapestry of prosperous kingdoms: the Khwarezmian Empire, the Jin dynasty, the kingdoms of Rus, the Islamic caliphates. These were sophisticated civilizations with grand cities, centers of learning, and complex social hierarchies. The daughters of nobility in these societies lived lives of relative privilege. They were educated, often literate, trained in music and poetry. Princess Tumulun had spent her childhood learning Persian literature, practicing calligraphy, and mastering the intricate social dances of court politics. She had been promised in marriage to a prince from Samarkand, a union that would have strengthened her father's position. But the Mongols were coming, and they brought with them a completely different set of rules. The Mongol military machine was unlike anything the settled world had ever encountered. They moved with terrifying speed, coordinated across vast distances, and employed psychological warfare as effectively as their famous composite bows. But what truly set them apart was their approach to conquered peoples, an approach that would forever alter the lives of women like Tumulun. The siege lasted 5 months. 5 months of dwindling food supplies, mounting desperation, and the constant thunder of Mongol siege engines. Tumulun watched from her tower as the city's defenses crumbled section by section. She saw her father's increasingly frantic attempts to organize the defense, heard the screams when the outer walls finally fell. And then, one morning in early 1220, the inner citadel was breached. What happened next would be replayed in city after city, kingdom after kingdom, as the Mongol conquest rolled across Asia and into Europe. The pattern was always the same, refined into a terrible science. The Mongol warriors flooded through the streets with practiced efficiency. They separated the population into groups, craftsmen here, young men there, women and children in another area. The elderly and those deemed useless were killed immediately. The young men faced a choice: join the Mongol army or die. Most chose death. But the women faced something far more complex. Before we continue with what happened to Tumulun and countless others like her, take a moment to like this video if you're finding this story compelling. These historical accounts deserve to be heard, and your support helps share these forgotten voices. Tumulun stood in the central square with hundreds of other women from Otrar's noble families. Mongol officers moved through the crowd, examining faces, checking teeth like one might inspect horses, assessing ages and physical condition. It was a process of sorting, of categorization, and it happened with cold efficiency. The most beautiful women, particularly those from noble families, were separated into one group. Tumulun found herself pushed toward this gathering, her silk robes now torn and dusty, her elaborate hairstyle disheveled. Around her stood the daughters of governors, wealthy merchants, and military commanders, the elite of Otrar society, now reduced to spoils of war. A Mongol officer approached her, speaking through an interpreter. "You are the daughter of Analchuk?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Genghis Khan has special interest in your father's family. You will travel to the Khan's camp." The words should have terrified her, and they did, but they also meant something crucial. She would live, at least for now. This selection process was remarkably consistent across the Mongol conquests. Highborn women were valuable assets, too useful to simply discard. But valuable for what? The answer to that question would determine the fate of hundreds of thousands of women over the next century. The journey to Genghis Khan's mobile capital took 3 months. Tumulun traveled in a wagon train with dozens of other highborn captives from various conquered cities. They were guarded closely but not cruelly treated. They received adequate food and water, medical attention when needed, and were protected from assault by common soldiers, a protection that was rigidly enforced. This might seem surprising, but it made perfect strategic sense. These women weren't random captives. They were political assets, potential diplomatic tools, future mothers of children who might inherit kingdoms. Their value lay not just in their beauty or their bodies, but in their bloodlines and their potential to legitimize Mongol rule over conquered territories. During those long months of travel, Tumulun had time to observe her captors. She noticed how Mongol women moved freely through the camps, how they rode horses as skillfully as men, how they participated in councils and made decisions. It was shockingly different from her own rigidly hierarchical society where women's movements were restricted and their public roles limited. She also noticed something else. Many of the Mongol commanders already had multiple wives, and many of those wives were clearly from conquered peoples. Chinese women, Turkic women, Persian women, all integrated into Mongol households, some clearly holding positions of significant influence. It was her first glimpse of what her future might hold. When Tumulun finally stood before Genghis Khan, she was struck by how unremarkable he appeared. This man who had toppled empires, who commanded armies that stretched beyond the horizon, looked like any aging warrior, weathered, scarred, his eyes sharp but tired. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke in Mongolian. The interpreter translated, "Your father killed my envoys. His action cost many lives. What should I do with his daughter?" It was a test. Tumulun understood that instantly. She straightened her back, met his gaze directly, an act of boldness that would have been unthinkable in her father's court, and spoke clearly. "My father made his choice. I am here because of it. I cannot undo his actions, but I can choose my own path forward. I am educated. I speak 4 languages. I understand court protocol and diplomatic custom. I can be useful to you or you can kill me, but killing me wastes what I can offer." The Khan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a useful quality. "You will join my daughter Alakai's household," he said finally. "She can use someone with your skills." And just like that, Tumulun's fate was sealed, not as a concubine, not as a slave, but as something far more complex and historically significant. If you're still watching, I encourage you to subscribe. This story goes places you won't expect, and there are many more untold histories like this one on this channel. To understand what happened to women like Tumulun, we must understand Genghis Khan's revolutionary approach to conquered territories. Unlike many conquerors who simply extracted tribute and moved on, the Mongols built a sophisticated administrative system that required local cooperation. And the key to that cooperation was marriage. Genghis Khan had many daughters. History has largely forgotten their names, but they were among his most powerful political tools. He married them to conquered or allied rulers, creating a network of familial obligations across his empire. But here's where it gets truly interesting. These marriages came with conditions. When a local ruler married a Mongol princess, he was required to periodically report to the Khan's court, often for military campaigns. During his absences, his Mongol wife would rule in his stead. And these women ruled with absolute authority, answering only to the Khan himself. Princess Alakai, to whose household Tumulun had been assigned, was married to the ruler of the Ongud tribe. When her husband was called away to war, Alakai didn't just maintain his kingdom, she expanded it. She commanded armies, negotiated treaties, administered justice, and built alliances. And she did all of this with a household staff that included dozens of highborn women from conquered peoples. Women like Tumulun. Tumulun's first year in Alakai's household was a period of profound transformation. She learned Mongolian, studied Mongol law and custom, and began to understand the intricate web of politics that governed the empire. She also learned something shocking. In this new world, her education and noble background weren't liabilities, they were valuable assets. Alakai used her educated captives as administrators, translators, and diplomatic advisors. When negotiating with Persian officials, she would have Tumulan present to explain cultural nuances and proper protocols. When drafting correspondence to Chinese governors, she relied on captive Chinese noblewomen who understood the complex etiquette of that civilization. It was a strange inversion of expectations. These conquered women, who by all rights should have been reduced to servitude, found themselves wielding indirect but real power. They weren't free, make no mistake about that, but they had agency, influence, and purpose. Tumulan witnessed Alakai make decisions that affected thousands of lives. She sat in on councils where military strategy was debated, trade routes planned, and justice administered. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to see herself not as a captive waiting for rescue, but as a participant in this new order. This psychological transformation was crucial to Mongol success. By giving conquered elites, including women, a stake in the new system, the Mongols created collaborators rather than constant rebels. It was manipulation, certainly, but it was also opportunity. By 1225, 5 years after Otrar fell, Tumulan had been married. Not to a Mongol warrior, but to a minor Persian noble who governed a region on the empire's western frontier. The marriage was arranged by Alakai, part of the complex web of alliances that held the empire together. Her husband, Hassan, had bent the knee to the Mongols rather than fight. He had kept his position in exchange for loyalty and tribute. Now, by marrying the educated daughter of a conquered governor, a woman who had been trained in Alakai's household and understood Mongol administration, he gained a wife who could help him navigate the new political reality. Tumulan gave birth to 3 children over the next decade. Her sons would grow up speaking both Persian and Mongolian, comfortable in both cultures. Her daughter would eventually marry into a Turkic family that had also submitted to Mongol rule. These marriage connections, multiplied across thousands of families, created a new mixed elite class that stabilized Mongol rule. This pattern repeated throughout the empire. High-born daughters of conquered peoples were integrated into the system through strategic marriages. Some married Mongol officers, others married local elites who had submitted, and still others remained in the households of Mongol princesses, serving as administrators and advisors. It wasn't freedom and it wasn't equality, but it was survival, and for some, it was even a form of power. Stay with me, the story takes an even more surprising turn. But Tumulan's fate, complex as it was, represented only one outcome. Not every daughter of conquered nobles found herself in a position of relative privilege. The Mongol system was hierarchical and pragmatic, and different women faced vastly different fates depending on countless variables. Beauty, age, skills, social status, and sometimes sheer luck. Lower-ranking noblewomen and daughters of wealthy merchants might be distributed as wives to Mongol soldiers as rewards for service. These women often found themselves in harsh conditions, living in felt yurts on the steppes, raising children in a culture completely foreign to them, cut off from everything they had known. Some adapted. Over time, their children would be considered Mongol, and they themselves would learn the language, adopt the customs, and become part of their new communities. Their original identities would fade, remembered only in family stories passed down through generations. Others never adapted. Historical records, fragmentary as they are, contain hints of women who died from despair, who refused to eat, who never learned to speak their captor's language. These stories are harder to find because they weren't the stories the Mongols bothered to record. But they existed, countless silent tragedies that history has mostly forgotten. And then there were the women who became slaves. Women from common backgrounds, or those captured in cities that resisted too fiercely, might be enslaved and sold throughout the empire. They worked as domestic servants, laborers, or in the worst cases, as sexual slaves. The Mongol legal code, the Yasa, actually provided some protections. Slaves could not be killed arbitrarily, and there were penalties for certain abuses, but these laws were inconsistently enforced, especially far from the centers of power. The diversity of outcomes makes it impossible to give a single answer to what happened to the daughters of the Mongol conqueror's enemies. Their fates were as varied as their circumstances, shaped by factors both within and beyond their control. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome involved daughters who rose to positions of genuine power. This happened most often with women who entered the households of Mongol princesses or high-ranking Mongol women. In Mongol culture, women could own property, initiate divorce, and inherit wealth. Elite Mongol women commanded respect that would have been unthinkable in most contemporary societies. And some conquered women, through intelligence, adaptability, and opportunity, managed to claim positions of real authority within this system. One recorded example involves a Chinese noblewoman named Li, captured when the Jin dynasty fell. She was assigned to the household of Sorghutani Beki, one of the most powerful women in Mongol history and mother of Kublai Khan. Li became Sorghutani's chief administrator, managing vast estates and negotiating with Chinese officials. When Kublai Khan later established the Yuan dynasty in China, Li held a position roughly equivalent to a senior court official, extraordinary for a woman in any context and almost unbelievable for a conquered captive. Such examples were rare, but they existed. They suggest that the Mongol system, for all its brutality, contained unexpected spaces where talented women could exercise agency and power, regardless of their origins. By the time Tumulan was an old woman, the world had changed beyond recognition. The Mongol Empire had fractured into 4 khanates, each developing its own character while maintaining the basic structures established by Genghis Khan. Tumulan's children were adults now, her grandchildren growing up in a world where Mongol rule was simply the way things were. They didn't think of themselves as children of conquest. They were simply members of the new elite, Persian in culture but Mongol in political identity. This was the empire's ultimate victory. Not just conquest, but absorption. The daughters of conquered peoples, through marriage and integration, had become links in a chain that bound the empire together. Their children and grandchildren formed a new hybrid aristocracy that could navigate multiple cultures, speak multiple languages, and understand both conqueror and conquered. The genetic evidence supports this historical pattern. Modern DNA studies show that the Mongol expansion left a striking genetic legacy, with millions of people across Asia carrying genetic markers that trace back to this period. This wasn't just the result of rape and random violence, though that certainly occurred, but also of these systematic marriage networks that integrated conquered populations into the Mongol elite. If you've made it this far in the story, you might be feeling conflicted. The historical reality doesn't fit neatly into simple narratives of pure victimhood or unexpected empowerment. It's messier, more complex, more human than that. The daughters of the Mongol conqueror's enemies experienced trauma, loss, and profound displacement. Many suffered terribly, but some also found unexpected paths to survival, adaptation, and even power. Their stories resist simple moral categorization. What makes this history particularly challenging is how little direct evidence we have from the women themselves. The Mongol chronicles were written by men, primarily recording military campaigns and political machinations. The women's voices, their fears, hopes, strategies, and interior lives are largely lost to us. We have fragments, a line in a Chinese chronicle about a captive woman who became an influential advisor, a Persian poem mourning daughters sent to Mongol camps, a legal document recording property held by a woman whose name suggests mixed ancestry. From these fragments, we must reconstruct entire worlds. Before we conclude, if this story has moved you or taught you something new about history, please consider subscribing and sharing this video. These forgotten histories matter, and they need to be told. History doesn't record what happened to the real Princess Tumulan, if she even existed as an individual rather than a composite of experiences shared by countless women. But we can imagine her final years, informed by what we know of similar women's lives. Perhaps she died in her 60s, in a house in Persia that blended Mongol and Persian architecture. Perhaps her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed, a family that embodied the mixing of cultures that defined the Mongol era. Perhaps she told them stories of Otrar, of the city that fell when she was 17, of the journey across the steppes, of Princess Alakai's fierce intelligence and pragmatic mercy. Perhaps her grandchildren, who spoke Persian and Mongolian with equal fluency, who rode horses like Mongols but wrote poetry like Persians, who worshipped both the sky gods and Allah, asked her, "Grandmother, what was it like before?" And perhaps she struggled to answer, because the before was so distant, so different, that it felt like another life entirely. Perhaps she wasn't even sure anymore whether she had lost everything or gained something unexpected. Perhaps she understood that she was both victim and survivor, captive and adapter, conquered and, in some strange way, conquering. History doesn't give us neat endings. It gives us complexity, ambiguity, and the stubborn fact that human beings adapt to almost anything. The story of the daughters of the Mongol conquerors' enemies asks us to sit with uncomfortable complexity. It challenges our desire for simple narratives of good and evil, victim and perpetrator, resistance and collaboration. These women lived through one of history's most dramatic transformations. They experienced trauma and loss on an almost unimaginable scale. And yet some of them also found ways to survive, adapt, and even thrive within the new order. They made impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Their stories remind us that history isn't just about great leaders and military campaigns. It's also about the countless individuals whose lives were upended by forces beyond their control, who made difficult choices with limited options, who adapted and survived and passed on their experiences to future generations. The Mongol Empire eventually fell, as all empires do, but its legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren of these mixed marriages, in the cultural exchanges that enriched both conquerors and conquered, in the genetic mixing that shaped populations across Asia. The daughters of the Mongol conquerors' enemies became mothers of a new world. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not to glorify conquest, but to honor the resilience, intelligence, and humanity of women who navigated impossible circumstances with whatever tools they had available. When you visit museums that display artifacts from the Mongol Empire, the elaborate clothing, the sophisticated metallurgy, the beautiful manuscripts, remember that behind many of these objects are stories like Tumulan's. Women who crossed vast distances, who learned new languages, who raised children between cultures, who became translators, administrators, diplomats, and mothers to a new hybrid elite. They weren't just passive victims of history. They were participants in it, for better or worse, making choices within the constraints available to them. And perhaps that's the most important lesson, that history is made not just by conquerors on horseback, but by the countless individuals, particularly women, whose adaptations, survivals, and small acts of agency shaped the world in ways both visible and invisible. Their voices are mostly lost to us now, preserved only in fragments and educated guesses. But if we listen carefully to the historical record, we can still hear echoes of their stories, complex, troubling, and profoundly human. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. If you found it meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who appreciate deep dives into forgotten histories. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told, and your support makes it possible to bring them to light